Let's travel back in time, not to the New York of skyscrapers and subways, but to the year 1746. Forget the towering metropolis of glass and steel we know today. Picture instead a restless colonial city of about 10,000 people, clinging to the southern tip of Manhattan. This was a stubborn outpost, caught between the British Empire and the vast American wilderness. Imagine wooden houses leaning into narrow, muddy streets. The air is a constant mix of salt water from the harbor, smoke from wood fires, the smell of livestock, and human waste. To understand New York in 1746 is to step into a world balanced on a knife's edge, a world of opportunity and fear, ambition and insecurity. The city was a crossroads of Atlantic trade, imperial rivalry, and deep social inequality. It was shaped by British rule, yet haunted by its Dutch past. Some of the oldest families still called it New Amsterdam. Royal officials, sent by King George II, struggled to impose order on a population that was ethnically mixed, socially divided, and already starting to feel its own importance. The city's harbor was its absolute lifeblood. It was always crowded with merchant ships arriving from England, the Caribbean, and other American colonies. They unloaded sugar, rum, molasses, textiles, and manufactured goods. In return, New York exported flour, wheat, timber, and furs. From dawn till dusk, the docks were a chaotic symphony of sound. Sailors shouted in different languages, enslaved Africans hauled heavy cargo under the watchful eyes of overseers, and merchants haggled over deals that could make or break their fortunes. By colonial standards, New York's economy was booming. It was driven by trade networks that connected it to the brutal plantation economies of the Caribbean and the growing farms of New York and New Jersey. But this prosperity was far from evenly distributed. It was concentrated in the hands of a small merchant elite. These wealthy families lived in large, impressive homes near the waterfront or along Broad Street. Meanwhile, everyone else, the artisans, laborers, sailors, servants, and the enslaved, crowded into smaller dwellings, often sharing cramped quarters with extended family or even unrelated lodgers. Slavery was a fundamental, inescapable reality of life in 1746 New York. Enslaved Africans and African Americans made up about 1/5 of the city's entire population. They worked as dockhands, domestic servants, craftsmen, and general laborers. The memory of the so-called Great Negro Plot of 1741 still hung heavily over the city. That event saw dozens of enslaved people and poor whites accused of plotting to burn down New York. The fear it created led to harsher controls, strict curfews, and brutal punishments that shaped daily life and social relations for everyone. In 1746, freedom and unfreedom existed side by side in a way that was both ordinary and terrifying. You could see it on the streets every day, as enslaved people passed free laborers, and incredible wealth sat uncomfortably atop immense suffering. Politically, New York was firmly under British control. A royal governor, appointed from London, held the top position, but his authority was constantly challenged by the colonial assembly. This assembly was dominated by wealthy landowners and merchants who fiercely guarded their local power and privileges. This tension between appointed royal authority and local power was already a defining feature of New York's political culture. It was an early sign of the conflicts that would eventually explode into the American Revolution. But in 1746, most colonists still saw themselves as loyal British subjects. They were proud of their connection to the empire and relied on its protection. This was especially true as the War of the Austrian Succession, known in the colonies as King George's War, raged across the Atlantic. It brought the fear of French and Spanish attacks right to the shores of coastal cities like New York. The city rushed to build and reinforce its defenses, especially the fortifications near the Battery, where cannons stood ready to repel enemy ships. Rumors of invasion could spread like wildfire through the city's taverns and marketplaces, causing panic in a matter of hours. These global conflicts shaped daily life in subtle but constant ways. Newspapers carried reports of battles happening thousands of miles away. Merchants worried constantly about privateers seizing their ships on the high seas. And ordinary residents feared shortages, sudden price spikes, or even being forcibly impressed into naval service. Yet, amidst all this anxiety, the city pulsed with social and cultural activity. Taverns were the nerve centers of the city. They were hubs for news, debate, and entertainment. Men gathered there to drink ale or rum punch, argue about politics, gossip about their neighbors, and listen to traveling musicians or storytellers. Churches of many different denominations anchored community life, reflecting New York's remarkable religious diversity. Anglicans, Dutch Reformed Protestants, Presbyterians, Lutherans, Quakers, and even a small Jewish community all coexisted. While it was far from tolerant by our modern standards, it was more pluralistic than many other colonial towns. Education and literacy were also growing in importance, especially among the merchant class. Newspapers like the New York Gazette circulated information and opinion, shaping a public sphere where ideas about rights, commerce, and governance could circulate more freely than ever before. Higher education opportunities were still limited, but discussions about founding a college were already underway. It reflected a growing belief that New York was destined for greater things, even while its streets remained unpaved and its infrastructure was rudimentary at best. The physical city itself in 1746 was compact and walkable. It extended north only to about where Wall Street is today. Beyond that lay open fields, farms, and country estates that would one day become Midtown and Harlem. The contrast between the dense, noisy southern tip of Manhattan and the quiet, rural landscape to the north was stark. It was a constant reminder that the wilderness was never far away. It also reminded residents that the Native American presence, though diminished and marginalized, was still part of the region's reality, especially through trade and frontier conflicts, even if their voices were largely excluded from colonial records and power structures. The social hierarchy was rigid, but not entirely fixed. Class distinctions were clearly marked by clothing, speech, and behavior, but the possibility of upward mobility through trade or skilled craftsmanship did exist. This possibility attracted immigrants from Europe and other colonies, adding to the city's already cosmopolitan character. This blend of aspiration and anxiety gave 1746 New York a distinctive energy, a sense that it was always in the process of becoming something else, never quite settled. It's a feeling that we might recognize today as quintessentially New York. Women's lives were largely defined by domestic roles and legal limitations, yet they were absolutely central to the functioning of households, businesses, and communities. Widows sometimes took over and ran shops or managed property. Enslaved women performed grueling labor under conditions that combined both racial and gendered oppression. Although women rarely appeared in official political life, their influence was felt in family networks, religious communities, and the informal economies that kept the city running. Crime and punishment were public and often brutal. Corporal punishment, fines, and public executions were meant to serve as stark warnings to others. Jails held debtors right alongside hardened criminals, reflecting a legal system that prioritized order and deterrence over any form of rehabilitation. These practices reinforced a culture of surveillance and suspicion, especially toward the poor, the enslaved, and any outsiders. But despite all the hardship, inequality, and fear, there was also celebration and joy. Holidays, markets, weddings, and religious festivals brought people together, if only for a short time. These moments allowed for shared humanity in a city that was otherwise deeply divided by status and race. So, when we look at New York in 1746, we see a city of contradictions. It was prosperous yet precarious, loyal to the British Crown yet increasingly assertive of its own interests, diverse yet deeply unequal. It was shaped by global forces, but grounded in intensely local experiences. And when we look back at this moment in the city's past, we can see the early outlines of themes that would define New York for centuries to come: immigration, commerce, conflict, resilience, and relentless, unstoppable change. It reminds us that even in its colonial infancy, New York was already a city in motion, driven by forces far larger than itself. And that's something worth remembering the next time you walk its streets, imagining that its story only began with skyscrapers and subways. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey back in time interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into history.